Welcome to Boston Jewish Now. I'm Jeremy Burton, and I'm joined by our producer, Arya Blanche.
So we have a few items to cover today. Let's get started with San Francisco.
I assume you are referring to the now widely seen video of State Senator Scott Wiener basically being hounded out of a trans rights rally and gathering on his way to a trans Shabbat celebration on Friday night.
I am referring to that.
Let's get into that. And I'm mindful, we sat down to talk about Pride Month and some of the complexities for Jewish Americans earlier this month. And this feels like a unfortunate and also important place to not ignore as we end this month of Pride. So let's say a couple of things just up front, and I don't think we need to belabor this. What happened in San Francisco on Friday night was antisemitism. Whatever you think about the issues involved, whatever you think about Scott Wiener, who is a candidate for Nancy Pelosi's now vacant seat or open seat in Congress, the extent to which he was harassed, bullied, even physically, some of the names that were called, the taunting, the use of various anti-Semitic tropes. What happened was anti-Semitic. People should be condemning it, full stop, no caveats. And we're not going to get into the particulars of the fact that some people in the San Francisco political leadership are in fact condemning it, full stop, while others are doing a bit of a I condemn all hate matters, not really addressing what actually happened. I will leave that to our colleagues at the San Francisco JCRC to pick apart who said what and who did not say enough. And certainly I encourage everybody here to follow and pay attention to my colleague, Ty Gregory, the CEO there, who does phenomenal work. But I want to pull back and talk about some of the broader issues. What happened in San Francisco on Friday night should serve as a warning to the Jewish community about, frankly, the dangers of trying to placate an extreme and radical left with which there is no room for compromise and accommodation. And I say this not to criticize Senator Wiener per se, who I know is supported by many members of the Jewish community in San Francisco, but understand who he is in this dynamic. He is someone who has for decades led the way on advocacy for and sponsoring legislation in support of trans rights in Sacramento. There is no one, I think, I'm told, in California political life who has been more forceful, more clear, and to even his statement this week, this is a particular trans rights gathering that he has been going to for decades. And I don't say this to endorse his point of view and his positions, he is a Jewish public official who has used the term genocide with regards to characterizing events in Gaza. He is someone who has publicly called for and said that as a member of Congress, he would support the end of U.S. military aid to Israel. The only thing he has not done is call for the dismantlement of the state of Israel. In terms of the public discourse agenda, the only thing on the checklist of how do you show your hostility or opposition to Jewish security in Israel that he has not done in this cycle has been declaring himself an anti-Zionist. And so here you have somebody who his only, quote, sin in the eyes of those anti-Semitic harassers is to
not going that far.
Is not going just that one last step of calling for the dismantlement of the state of Israel. And that makes him not only unfriendly to them, but someone who needs to be chased out of space and rejected and harassed and taunted. I think that is a real wake-up call to anybody who hasn't been paying attention and a real warning to those of us who sit in liberal Jewish space and think if we can meet them halfway on language, if we can accommodate their criticism without validating anti-Zionism per se, and I'm using the term anti-Zionism in the sense of dismantlement of the state of Israel, not in the way I understand some people use it differently, there isn't room to accommodate here. They will they, and by they I mean the kinds of individuals and organizations that we saw on that video Friday night, there's no space to meet them halfway. And I think that's a warning call and something that progressive Jews who believe in the project of Jewish peoplehood and progressive Jews who believe that we have national rights in our homeland, with all of our criticisms of the government of Israel, with all of our criticism of how the government of Israel has prosecuted certain wars, need to look at that and have an honest conversation. I think there's a second thing that needs to be said very, very clearly right now, and I'm saying this at a time that I'm very mindful of the vulnerability that members of the trans community are feeling in the context of various rulings and policy statements and laws that are being passed around the country, and we don't need to iterate them here because there are just too many of them, frankly, to iterate. And I have seen in the last couple of days, and I have received in my inbox certain notes from members of the Jewish community who have said to me, and I'm paraphrasing other people, if the trans community is going to be this hostile to even far left Jews who are not fully with them, we should not be expending any time or energy supporting the rights of trans people in this country. And I want to be very explicit in this moment of vulnerability that we need to reject that kind of thinking. We need to reject that kind of thinking for a number of reasons. One, we have trans members of our community, whether they are the children in our families, whether they are siblings, whether they are neighbors who are not the enemy, who are literally part of our beloved family that we want to protect and that we need to protect. Second, and this is not particular to the rights of our trans neighbors, our values, our principles should never be driven by the hatred and animosity expressed by others. And in this case particularly, I want to say some other people, not all. It is not a given that because 2 or 4 or 5 people at this event in San Francisco behaved abominably and anti-Semitic, that everyone there is therefore abominable and anti-Semitic, although there is certainly a real problem that we saw in that video of the silence of bystanders. That is a larger problem than any one space that we have to work on. But those 4, those 5, even if those 50, those 100 people don't determine our values are our values. And very frankly, I am not going to let my commitment to our trans family members and neighbors be modified by a couple of anti-Semites in San Francisco any more than we should allow the statements and behaviors of a single member of Israel's cabinet who is a convicted racist, who has been convicted of incitement to terrorism. And yes, we're talking about Ben Gvir, the Minister of National Security, and of course his supporters, and he has voters, but that is a part of the fabric of Israel. We don't allow their disgusting statements, messages, and behaviors to undermine our commitment to the whole of the state of Israel and the people of Israel, right? If we allow the most extreme outliers in any community or any society to define our relationship to that whole society, then we might as well pack it up. Pack it up in regards to America, where there are definitely people we have problems with. Pack it up with regard to Israel, where there are obviously, people like Itamar Ben-Gvir. And also pack it up with regards to our commitments to the LGBTQ community, because there are definitely a couple of anti-Semites. And I note this at the same time that this weekend we had the pleasure of seeing, many, many, many Jews marching together at the New York Pride Parade with Jews Belong kind of signs, carrying the Jewish pride flag, which has a Star of David in the trans colors in the middle of a pride flag, and getting a loving reception, a positive reception, as did a few weeks ago at Pride in Boston, as did Jews at other events in San Francisco. So we're not going to make decisions based on the most hateful, extreme members of any community, including our own, whoever our own may be. And I think that's important to say right now at a time of real vulnerability in the trans community. I think the last thing we have to say is, I said this is a warning and a wake-up to those in the Jewish community who may not have been paying attention. This also needs to be a warning and a wake-up to the larger liberal American project, and liberal leaders. Because take away the issue specific, Israel anti-Semitism. What we saw in San Francisco was a rejection of the American idea. This is the behavior of non-pluralistic people. And I couldn't help watching that video and think it felt like something, frankly, straight out of Cultural Revolution China and Maoists, that kind of garbage where you are made to conform and bend the knee to a complete ideology, a complete catechism of beliefs in order to belong in any of those things. And that itself is an un-American approach to the world. We have built this country on a kind of pluralism where we respect differences and we hold each other in community across differences, and we agree to work with people that we disagree with on some things and agree with on others, even when we disagree vigorously. And we've talked on this podcast about what it means to work in coalition with faith communities with whom we are in deep disagreement about, say, reproductive rights, or with whom we are in deep disagreement with on various other issues, and still work together on issues and concerns and the betterment of society where we can. And there are those elements on the far left and the far right, and we saw this in San Francisco on the far left on Friday night, who do not believe in that, who do not believe in the idea of America as a pluralistic society. And we need to call upon our partners in the world and our civic leaders to say, this is a bridge too far. We're not going to try to accommodate these people. They are not part of what we are trying to build in this country. And they're certainly welcome to come back to the table if they embrace more pluralistic views and more tolerant views of difference.
There are folks who are trying their best. Even in our own community, we sort of lunge and we don't take a breath and take a pause.
I imagine that you are referring to some of the events in Lexington this last week. So for those who have not been following along, and I suspect that many people are not even aware of this, there was a development in Lexington, Massachusetts, where, and I'm being very shorthand in my summary, essentially, late last Sunday night or Monday morning, a letter went out from the principal of the Diamond School that could rightly be read and was read by many in our community as apologizing for teaching Holocaust education. And it set off a lot of alarm bells, locally and well beyond the local community. And there's something to be noted on here, which is that as often as not, before local leaders in Lexington or in the broader Massachusetts civic space and in the broader Massachusetts Jewish community can even get into something, it's not the first time, we're already seeing tweets and various social media posts from national activists who have very large platforms raising alarm bells in a completely non-relational way and completely based on a very limited set of facts. In a case like this, it's important to take a breath, to your point, and say, hey, can we find out what's going on here before we go and condemn it? And in the particular case of Lexington, there are a lot of wonderful, good people there, Jewish and allies. There are two amazing synagogues there, one conservative and one reform temple that work very closely together, Temple Amunah and Temple Isaiah. Their rabbis have done a lot of work in the civic space and are good partners to us and to others. There is a group that we've been invested in called Lexington United Against Antisemitism. That is both Jewish and non-Jewish leaders in Lexington who've really come together since October 7th. And frankly, we've done our own outreach and relationship building with school districts around the region as part of our larger K-12 work. And all of us in that moment last Monday were like, hang on, let's take a breath. Oh, we even posted something last Monday. Maybe it didn't get seen quite everywhere we would have liked it to be seen on our social media. Just saying, we're aware. We're looking into it. We want to know the facts before we have more to say.
And these things don't happen immediately.
People are generating thousands of calls from around the country. It's a little hard sometimes. So it took us a day or two to get into it. And essentially, there were a number of meetings. I'm not going to get into all the particulars because I don't want to speak for others. But certainly by the middle of the week, there have been conversations with the superintendent in Lexington, with educators in the school, with others to learn more. And while there are some elements of this story that are still, I think, a little unclear, as to be fair, as you said, and there are clearly problems in Lexington, in the school district. There have been a number of incidents, and there are a number of efforts to address those incidents, not all of which have been handled as well as could be. What we all certainly came to understand by later in the week is that while the letter itself was incredibly poorly worded and rightfully offensive to many in our community, it didn't actually reflect the facts on the ground of what had happened. This school and this district have made meaningful efforts to engage around how their students understand contemporary anti-Semitism. And that in the particular case, it was not a Holocaust education class. It was bringing in a third-party educational group to do a lesson on contemporary anti-Semitism, its impact, and how to understand it. And yes, there was some kind of feeling of negativity in some responses to that within the student body and their parents, but that is different from saying there was negativity to teaching Holocaust education and memory. Those are different things. And yes, the principal sent a terrible letter which referenced, frankly, the wrong things and conflated things. And there is repair work that needs to be done, but the repair work can be done in the context of people who are trying to do the right thing, people who are reaching out to Jewish organizations saying, help us address anti-Semitism, and then getting it wrong a little bit, at least a little bit. But we have to give them, to your point, the opportunity to continue to improve.
Grace and space.
Grace and space. Good way of saying it. And I think, Lexington United Against Anti-Semitism put out a long letter about this. The rabbis in Lexington sent a letter to families in their congregations. And I think all of us are saying the same thing, which is, to your point, grace and space. They didn't get it exactly right, but they were headed in the right direction, and they are trying, and we should try to meet them halfway rather than running a global campaign of condemnation.
Speaking of what's going on here locally, our Haitian and Syrian neighbors.
Yeah, so there have been two rulings in the Supreme Court in this final week, one of which effectively allows the administration to withdraw temporary protective status for Haitians and Syrians who have been here legally, fully documented, protected refugees, some for decades. And at the same time, just this morning as we're recording, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutional principle of birthright citizenship, which was articulated in the Constitution following the Civil War and had been affirmed by the Supreme Court going back to, I think, the 1890s explicitly. So there's like a bit of a good news.
Good news for some, bad news for others.
Bad news indeed. And, I would just say in terms of the question of birthright citizenship, it is a great relief that the Supreme Court has upheld the Constitution and rightfully said that the President of the United States cannot amend the Constitution by executive order. At the same time, it's a little disturbing that the vote was only 6-3. I mean, it was a fairly plain reading of the Constitution that 3 of the 9 justices chose not to read, and that itself should be disconcerting. But let's take the breath of relief. Now, with regards to temporary protective status, I don't say this to litigate, never, or to relitigate the ruling of the Supreme Court in and of itself, in the sense that temporary protective status is clearly a federal determination. It is by definition temporary, and much can be said about what people disagree with about the court's ruling. But I think for our purposes, we need to be really mindful and aware of how devastating and harmful this is for actual people. Because sometimes this gets discussed, in the legalities and in the constitutionality. And does the president have the right or not have the right to declare or extend temporary protective status? And clearly presidents, or at least the administrations, do have the authority under our system of laws to determine the temporary protective status writ large, whether in this case it's justified. Still, If we're talking about the Haitian American community, we have 45,000 households in Massachusetts that have families here, members who are here on temporary protected status, some of whom have been here for decades, all of whom have been working here legally. These are documented immigrants who may, as soon as tomorrow, no longer be documented immigrants, no longer be able to legally work in the United States. We're talking about people who make an extraordinary contribution to the economy in Massachusetts. We're talking about people who overwhelmingly have been good law-abiding citizens who have not in any way run afoul of the law in their time here over decades. We're talking about people who have a direct impact, not just on the broader society in Massachusetts, but on the Jewish community. There are human service partners of ours like Hebrew Senior Life that have workers at risk. And their CEO has talked about this in the Boston Globe yesterday and elsewhere. They are going to have to, if this is implemented, essentially lay off caregivers. We're talking about nursing staff. We're talking about housekeeping staff. We're talking about culinary staff who are going to be out of work. And those are people who care for our families, people who care for our elderly, people who are, and I say this as someone who unfortunately has had to go to a number of funerals this last week and heard a number of families, and I'm sure many of people have had this experience, when family members get up at a funeral and they thank the caregivers who carried their parents through the end of life. We are talking about people who are genuinely loved and cared for and part of our families in meaningful ways, and our neighbors. And this is going to have a huge impact here in Massachusetts. It's going to have a huge impact on the delivery of human services, not just in the Haitian community, but across the community, including the Jewish community. And it's going to create an immediate humanitarian crisis. We are talking about thousands upon thousands of families who are about to lose their incomes. And no, thousands upon thousands of families are not going to suddenly self-deport tomorrow. That's just not the reality. So you're going to have people who are going to have difficulty paying their rent. People are going to have difficulty putting food on the table. People who are going to be afraid to go to the doctor, which creates other potential medical issues in terms of the ability of disease to spread, because if you don't get it treated, neighbors, contagious, like that can happen in communities. So we're at a time of real risk, real danger, real harm to thousands and thousands of both individuals and families, and really all of us in communities like Massachusetts, where 1 in 7 of all Haitian temporary status holders are here in Massachusetts. And I think we just need to name that, and we need to commit ourselves to dealing with this head on. That means supporting Hebrew Senior Life and JVS and JFS Metro West. It means taking a look at what other organizations like United Way will be doing to address the immediate care issue. And it means speaking up and joining with them in urging Congress. And I recognize we don't have a great deal of say with the majority in the Senate in terms of setting an agenda, but the House has already passed legislation led by members of the Massachusetts delegation to extend these folks' status. We do need the Senate to take this up, and we need our senators to be absolutely determined to push the majority to take this issue up. And we need national Jewish organizations, including those that have some sway in other states, to take this up as well. It's a real issue. And the last thing I'll say is, because we are in July 4th week, and we are trying to mark this moment and have done so on an earlier podcast this week. I'm thinking back when I was in high school in 1986. I was living in New York, as people know. President Ronald Reagan came to New York July 4th weekend 40 years ago this week for the purpose of rededicating the Statue of Liberty. And President Reagan, invoking the Declaration of Independence, invoking the idea of America, in his rededication of the Statue of Liberty 40 years ago this week, he said, "Ms. Liberty is still giving life to the dream of a new world where old antagonism could be cast aside and people of every nation could live together as one. it's inspiring to me. It's also, frankly, saddening to me that within our lifetimes, within my own personal memory, a president of the United States, one of the great presidents of the United States, a Republican president, could so powerfully evoke the idea of America as part of the celebration of July 4th, as a nation of immigrants, as a place for the best and the good from around the world to come and share in a dream and a vision. And I hope that regardless of the direction that so many in our politics have taken today to dehumanize the other and to reject the very project of America as an immigrant nation, that we right now can reach out to our Haitian brothers and sisters here in Boston and say, we see you, we understand the harm, and we understand that you are part of our vision for this country, and we're going to keep standing with you as long as we must.